Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Write or Die Show. I'm your host, Randi-lee. On the show, we interview other writers and we talk about mental health from their personal journeys. If you have not already hit that like and subscribe button, go ahead, do that now so that you never miss an episode. Hi, everybody. How's it going? I am mostly all better. I was sick last week, although definitely in a lot of pain still, but that's okay. We're gonna get needles again tomorrow. Boo! But today with us, my cat. I have one cat who has managed to stay in here, so you might get a little peek at Binks if she decides to come up here. She has not yet been on the show, everyone. It's very exciting because she's the newest kitty edition, so we'll see. All right, with us today we have John Borden. Hello.
Hey, Randy. So happy to be here. I wasn't aware that there was going to be an extra guest here today, but I'm excited for your furry friend.
Right? She's over there right now. She found one of her toys that she likes to hide around. Normally, if we do have an extra guest, it's Neo, my three-legged cat. But he was sleeping in the other room, but Binks was like, "Hey, I'm coming in." I'm like, "Hey, you're cute, but don't make trouble," because there's a couple. I have a lot of cats. There's a couple of them that I'm like, "No, you can't come in at all because you will just knock over the microphone and you'll knock over the computer." My one cat, actually, Smokey, because she likes to rub up against stuff, so she actually rubbed up against the computer right at the little X and closed everything out the one time. Yeah. I'm like, "Hey, so you're definitely not allowed in here, kitty. Love you, but no." So, enough about kitties. Unless you have any, then feel free to share. But tell us a little bit about who John is.
Yeah, well, so John is a cat lover. I've had cats, all growing up and everything. I had one myself for a couple years until COVID hit, and then, had to make a couple moves and couldn't take my little furry friend Petey with me. But maybe in the near future, we'll be going back down that path. But yeah, my name is John Borden. I am born and raised in New Jersey, live in Florida now in beautiful sunny St. Petersburg. And I wrote a book that I'm happy to talk about called Your Mindset is Your Reality, a firsthand account of the positive effects of psilocybin.
Purple's my favorite color. Clearly.
On mental health and addiction. And so the story of the book really just follows the path that I was on prior to an experience that I had with psilocybin mushrooms in October and November of 2022, and how up until that point, I was really just locked in my own head, locked in certain patterns of thoughts that led to anxiety, depression, PTSD, and an inability to recognize really what my own mind was doing to me. And then how through my experience with psilocybin, I was able to kind of rework all of those traps that I set for myself and actively make choices to live a more complete, wholesome, fulfilling life for me and the people in my life. So I'm happy to tell it, happy to spread the good word about, what psychedelics are able to do for me. And, just happy to be living a better life now.
Excellent. Warmth. I wish I was there. Actually, it's not bad this week. This week's been pretty nice out. You can actually get outside and walk around and enjoy it, but I'm sure we're gonna have another super cold blast here. We always do right after it gets warm, and you're like, "Oh, it's nice," and then it's like, full job.
Yeah, I understand your pain. It was 65 like 2 days ago. I was dying.
Yeah. Poor baby. Let me just get the tissues. So let's talk about your journey. Let's talk about this. You are, I think, the second, I want to say second person, but maybe I'm forgetting somebody, but maybe third, but to talk about the psychedelics.
Okay.
And to give you perspective and all those listening, we've had over 200 guests. So that's a very small percentage of people. But before you actually talk about that, take us a little bit further back so we can get a sense of where you were in life.
Yeah. So, I grew up, where do I want to start? Let's start high school, right? I was picked on a whole bunch. I never really developed the proper social skills because I grew up a little bit isolated in a town with only 1,000 people and not many kids
Oh.
my age. So, I went to school, but never really felt like I fit in all through grade school, high school. Got picked on a lot. Had seven mushrooms during my senior year. That was traumatic at the time, but that later in life crumbs for me to follow and how to get out of that. Shortly,
Oh no. So we keep freezing. All right.
a little bit of self confidence.
All right. Sorry, you totally froze out. Okay. Hopefully.
Okay, what did you
not...
catch?
I got up to in high, like you didn't fit in elementary, even through high school, and that's kind of work.
Yep. Okay. Well, I had my first experience with psilocybin mushrooms when I was 18. It was the day after I quit playing baseball, and I was a highly competitive baseball player as a kid. So it ended up
Why'd
being
you
a really
quit?
traumatic experience for me. I tore up my labrum in my shoulder, and I was a
Oh,
pitcher.
so not a choice.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And it led to a lot of mental health struggles. Are you familiar with what the yips are?
Yes. So
Okay.
I was a competitive kickboxer for many years.
Oh,
So
get out of here.
yeah, I think so. If you've played any competitive sports, you kind of feel that pain of
Yeah.
forced retirement, let's
Yeah.
say.
Well, it's like kind of one of those things that one little thing starts to go wrong, and then your mind starts playing that over and over and over again. And so I would play shortstop, and I would just kind of throw the ball back to the pitcher. And it got to the point where I had to just run it in and underhand it to him. Otherwise, I didn't know if it was going over his head in the
Oh
ground, 50
no.
feet to the side. Yeah. And so I just realized like I can't keep playing like this.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to question if it was worth it to get surgery and continue trying to play on a repaired arm or anything like that. And I was like, you know what? It would be a hell of a story to return from that and, make it to college ball or professional ball or anything.
Mm-hmm.
But I've got a lot of life to live. Let's see what else is out there. And so, I had to have that conversation with myself and come to that realization that that was just going to be in the past.
Mm-hmm.
But shortly after that experience, with psilocybin, I gained the confidence to stand up to bullies, and I started looking at myself in a little bit different way. By the time I got to college, I had started to gain a bit of confidence and even joined a fraternity, became president of my fraternity.
Oh wow.
Yeah, came out of college and had a strong social circle, had a girlfriend, and had a job that I was working at with Enterprise Rent a Car that I moved up very quickly. I made it from intern to branch manager in under 2 years, and
Wow.
I thought that I was crushing it at life. But after my office got broken into and robbed while
Oh.
at Enterprise, I got fired. And I didn't really understand why I deserved to be fired from that job for the incident until much later and internalized it big time. Well, internalized it while placing blame externally. And
Okay.
so what ended up happening is that all my free time became drinking and doing coke and chasing girls, which was the same thing that I did, from the time I was in high school all through college and then in the years that followed in my young professional life. And that continued until, you know, until I got laid off from my job at the beginning of COVID, and then it ticked up even higher until it was the point where, it was essentially the only thing that I would do with my free time. If I didn't have to work, or even sometimes while I was working, I was drinking, I was doing lines, I was chasing tail in any form possible,
Mm-hmm.
gambling, any addiction that you could think of, I had it. And that continued up until 2022. It continued from moving to Jersey to back to my mom's house, which we discussed briefly on our
Yes.
show. It continued when I moved up to Connecticut and got really dark there because of loneliness and because of isolation from people. I was in a new
So why
state
did you move to Connecticut?
for a job. I had a
Okay.
job opportunity. I was managing a territory for a healthcare cleaning and disinfecting company. And I knew
Okay.
that it wasn't what I wanted to do long term, but after 6 months unemployed, after I got laid off from my job at the beginning of COVID, I was ready to take anything
Yeah.
that kind of made sense. So I did that for a year before just absolutely reaching my breaking point. And uh, after I reached my breaking point, I met a guy at a bar who I had a conversation with and kind of said, "Hey, dude, everything that happened, getting fired, your girlfriend leaving you, you being up here in Connecticut, you could have changed all that. You had all that within your power. So it's your fault that you're in this position. It's your fault that you're unhappy." And I'm like, "Oh, you're the only person to ever say that to me. Fuck you, but thank you."
Right? And I think that's such a powerful moment because so many people, especially if you're just like a little bit friends with them or you sort of know the person, you never want to say exactly what you're thinking. I shouldn't say you never do. I do all the time. Gets me into trouble. But you often don't want to say, like, okay, I'm so tired of listening to you talk about your little pity party. These are all decisions you decided to make.
Yep.
My mom hated hearing me so after my brother had died from a drug overdose a few years ago, and my mom's all, oh, I could have done this. And she was trying to put blame on, oh, if he would have just met the right girl, and if this would have been different. I go, he made these decisions himself. Like, of course I'm sad, don't get me wrong, and I cried and all that other stuff, but I was so tired of listening to my mom blame everything else.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, my brother had a rough time. He was bullied, right? Crap happens, but ultimately these were decisions that he made. So I was so tired of her listening to everybody else that, yeah, I guess it was kind of like that guy in the bar where I was like, yeah, those were his decisions.
Yeah. And I'll get back to the guy at the bar and what happened after that, but my brother is 12 years older than me, and had he had a trip to rehab when I was a freshman in college. And then after he got back from rehab, the cartel tried to kill him, and he got ran over and then dragged under a car for 3/4 of a mile. Somehow lived. Yeah. Was in the hospital for a month and a half getting skin grafts and all these surgeries he needed to stabilize, had to learn how to walk, use the bathroom, so on and so forth. Got addicted to painkillers, then heroin, back to rehab, and somehow, some way is still alive, clean, and is now a small business owner. He owns his own pest control company. He's an excellent dad. He's a loving husband. So my brother's an absolute inspiration. But like while he was going through all that, I had the same reaction. Like I didn't care if he lived or died, and I was just like so blocked off from emotion. And that's one really big thing that I'll get back to at a later point. But when I had that conversation with the guy at the bar, and he told me the truth that nobody else in my life was willing to tell me, that all this shit is your fault. You can control it. And I was like, okay, well, I can control where I live. Let's move somewhere else. So I had just interviewed for a territory manager job within Connecticut that day and was excited about it. I thought I was going to get the job. But by the time I had that conversation, I was like, shit, I don't want that anymore. So I started applying to work from homes, did a trip down to Florida, and then road tripped up through Georgia and the Carolinas, just seeing different cities to see what I might like. Hey, kitty. And by the time I got home, I was like, okay, I'm moving to Tampa. So I made that change for myself, moved 2 months later, and all the drinking and coke usage and everything like that just followed me there. And it was something that like I recognized as that was a problem from just a few weeks before I decided to move home during 2020. But I never felt like I had control over it. I felt like it was such an ingrained piece of who I was and how I interacted with the world that removing it from my life was just not an option. And so, that continued up through October of 2022. And then I was planning on going to this 3-day EDM festival called EDC. That was about 2 hours away. And so I was kind of figuring out, what I wanted to do while I was there. I was a big drinker, big, Coke guy. And that was on the table, but I had done LSD and MDMA at those types of environments before and was kind of curious in trying to find that, but wasn't able to. And a friend of mine was like, well, I don't have that, but I do have mushrooms. And I'm like, okay, well, I had the one experience with mushrooms when I was 18. I felt like I was dying.
Oh,
Do I want to go down that road again?
yeah.
Uh, but I'd heard so many good things. I'd seen podcasts where people talk about it positively. I had
Yep.
watched documentaries that highlight the potential to help with mental health and things like that. And I'm like, okay, maybe I just wasn't in the right type of mental space. Again, it was the day
Hmm.
after I quit playing baseball. And so I bought, you know, a decent amount of them and decided to try them in the weeks that preceded the festival. And from the moment that I tried them for the first time, it was like a key got inserted into my brain and unlocked a waterfall to everything that I had suppressed my whole life. And
Oh.
so whether that's emotions from like my brother or from, getting fired from enterprise or from, past relationships or what have
Hmm.
I just recognized all these things in my life that I had not processed correctly and started to think through them in a different way. And
Hmm.
by the time I got to EDC, I had 3 different experiences with mushrooms that all
Wow.
yeah, piled on top of each other to say, okay, this is a realization. Okay, now this is another bigger realization, and then bigger realizations. And so
Hmm.
by the time I got to EDC, um, I had realization after realization after realization, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and I take the reader through all that in my book and kind of,
Yeah.
then my childhood stories and the things that led to certain, traumatic experiences and the way that I responded to them and reworking that trauma in real time through the story. And by the time I got to the end of the festival and got back home, I was like, holy shit, I am a completely different person than I was a month ago. How did this happen? Oh, wait, it all makes sense.
Hmm.
Let me try to distill this down into something that people can consume and really get an understanding of how incredible the potential for change is within these substances. So, I had a calling. Uh, I actually had a conversation with God the final day at EDC, and he told me to help people. And I was like, okay, how do I help people? And I had always been somebody who enjoyed writing. Um,
Hmm.
I had thought about writing a book for a while, but it was something that I never really felt compelled to actually take the reins and go for.
Hmm.
But when I got home from EDC, I had, a realization about my brother and just how big of an inspiration he is. And it finally flipped him from the drug addict guy who stole from me, guy who, you know, wasn't there for me when I was a little kid to, oh my God, my brother's an inspiration. And I figured, if these things can help me realize so much about myself and also about the incredible people in my life and help me to appreciate everybody in my life more than I had, there's no limit to what these can do for people on a person to person basis. So, I just felt compelled to share my story and hope that it could impact someone else in maybe a similar way that I was impacted by the podcasts and the documentaries that I watched.
That is fantastic. Okay, so
Threw a lot at you, I know.
oh, I know. So I'm sifting through here. Um, when you've had these realizations, and then you're like, and then I had to kind of, you know, absorb it all and stuff. What helped you work through these realizations? Because sometimes it can be like, oh my goodness, I never realized. But if you don't do something with that realization, it's gone.
hmm Well, really, the biggest thing is you have to have a willingness to look at yourself self objectively and decide what to do with the new information that you received. And thankfully for me, I had been somebody who had started consuming a good bit of personal development content
Okay.
after I had that conversation with the guy at the bar, because I just realized how far I was from the person that I wanted to be. But it didn't really sink in until I found the psilocybin. But so I started consuming a good bit of content. I started like recognizing that there were changes that needed to be made within myself prior to the consumption of psilocybin.
Okay.
And then when the psilocybin entered my brain, it was like all those changes that I actually wanted to make, like stopping drinking and coke and, just being a better person, being nicer, acknowledging people, having, more open, present conversations. It all just finally made sense. And it was like, okay, now that I recognize how I had been previously, I can choose to not be that person anymore. And I developed this vision for how I wanted to bring myself to the world. And every decision that I made from that point forward, I could ask myself, okay, is this choice a vote for the person that I was or a vote for the person that I want to be? And so it just became a habit of making the choice to become the person that I want to be.
Okay. So say you had a really hard decision and you had to debate between the two. And maybe debate is the wrong word, but you had the choice between the decision of one or the other. Is there any tools or any questions that kind of helped you decide on certain decisions?
Mhm. Um, so one of the biggest things was that I started to learn about breath work, and managing the breath. And there was a 4-7-8 breathing technique that I came across. I think it was from Andrew Huberman. It might have been an Instagram post, but he spoke about it. And rather than the old John, which cynically would have been like, okay, breathing, whatever, it was like, let me give that a shot. And so, I specifically remember a time when a friend texted me, and it was a contentious text, and one that, like, the old me would have responded in a combative way.
Mm-hmm.
But after doing 4 or 5 rounds of the 4-7-8 breathing, I was able to think through how to respond in a way that would help to diffuse the situation rather than escalate the situation. And so, time and time again, that type of situation came up and continues to come up.
Yeah.
But rather than allowing myself to react as the previous iterations of me had instilled through continuous action, I was able to breathe, evaluate, and then react based on a decision and not an ingrained response.
That is really a great answer, actually. 'Cause so many, I mean, I remember when I first was starting to learn about meditation and yoga and coping strategies or whatever, and they're like, and you're gonna breathe. I'm like, I breathe every day. Okay. I take in air, I expel air, I breathe. But there's so much more to breath work than just breathing,
Mhm.
right? So that's such a valid um response to it, where it's like, okay, something happens, and I used to be very emotionally triggered, where especially when dealing with the school for my younger one that's got autism. And hi baby. And so they would always, get you all charged up because they're talking about your kid, and but they don't know my kid, and then
Mhm.
responding in just this emotional explosive way. And as I learned about breath work and that kind of stuff, like you, it was just like, okay, I'm just going to breathe for a minute here, and whatever breath work works for you, whether it's the 4-7-8 or you got something else, and then go, okay, now I can think clearly. Now I can respond in a sophisticated kind of manner.
Mhm. And
Um,
it's so big, because so many of us, we go through life and our responses are ingrained from a young age based off certain inputs that we receive. And so your brain has been trained to, when there's a specific uh, input, right? There's an anxious response that's going on within your brain, or whatever the trigger is, to just act based off that input. And what makes us human is the ability to think rationally and not react like an animal. So we just
yes.
taking back control of that humanity.
Yeah. And it's definitely easier said than done. I feel like even when you're like, oh, just learn about breath work, it is so much harder to do it, especially when you're in an emotionally charged state, to be like, okay, I know what I need to do, but actually doing it is something completely different than knowing to do it. So it definitely takes work, which is why I like the term breath work. And I've heard it a bunch of times. It's not just breathing, it's not just meditation, it's not just all these, it's actual work that you have to consciously put effort into to get a good outcome.
Completely. Just like meditation practice.
Yes.
It's something that I make part of. So I host workouts every Sunday at one of the parks here in downtown St. Pete. And I start all of my workouts with a reading from the Daily Stoic, which is all, ancient philosophers and
Oh, okay.
centers around Stoicism. And then I ask my participants to meditate on it for a couple minutes. And whenever there's someone new, they're like, oh, I'm not great at meditation. I'm like, dude, nobody's great at meditation.
Right? That is a great response. Nobody's actually good at it. But it's so helpful that you just kind of let go of things.
Exactly. Just shut out the world for a little bit and see what comes to you, gain control over your thoughts and stop the constant influx of information just for a couple minutes. And it does so much good for you.
Yeah. Especially in this day and age where there's information coming at you from literally everywhere. Some good, some bad, some real, some fake. And it's like, it's just so much. And so, yeah, being able to kind of shut down for even just 2-3 minutes and just focus on what the heck is going on inside of you is easier said than done, of course, but very, very helpful.
Yeah, completely. And, like ever since I had the experience with mushrooms, and, continue to experience mushrooms, we'll be honest. There ain't no shame in it. So ever since that, it was kind of this recognition of how much I was overloaded with information, So I started keeping my phone in black and white mode. I don't know if you can see that, but it's
I didn't know that was a mode.
Yeah. And it helps reduce the dopamine exposure so that the phone's not as addictive. So if you're, on Instagram, you don't get caught in a scrolling loop for 30 minutes. It turns into 5 minutes,
Yes.
And so it's all about just making those little changes to make sure that you're not overloaded with all the information that's given to us today, because it can drive you fucking crazy.
What do you think, Binks? Yeah, she says she agrees. She is, how old are you now? Like 7 months old now, so she's just a little one. She's just, that's why everything is so exciting to her right now. It's very funny. So after all these experiences, and it was fairly recently because you were saying 2022, right? So really, in the grand scheme of life, was a short time ago. How have things been going?
Well, I'm glad you asked, because, with the recognition of the way that I was living life and the vision that I had for myself, just so much free time got opened up where I wasn't drinking anymore. I wasn't partying anymore. I had more energy throughout the day. And, shortly after I had my experience that I document in the book, I decided to finally get a bike fixed that had sat in my garage for like 5 years. Yeah, and I walked past the wheel that I needed to get a new tube put in every day for the longest time. And
something so simple too.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, dude, just take it to a fucking bike shop. But I had no desire to ride it because this wasn't part of my day. But then, you finish the work day and you're like, okay, well, I'm not drinking. I'm not partying anymore. What do I do with myself? And I was like, I would like to go on a bike ride. And so I got my bike fixed and I started going on bike rides and I started making that a part of my everyday. And, I've been someone that's been into physical fitness my whole life. I like I said before, I was a competitive baseball player and worked out for that before transitioning into like powerlifting, bodybuilding stuff in college and then through my 20s. And even, as I was partying and everything like that, it was always something that I always made a part of my life. But not to a level that it is now. And so when I got my bike fixed, it started to turn into something where I would incorporate biking into more of my everyday. And I basically spent all of 2023, following that help people and write, but also not really knowing where I was going in life myself.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I had done a trip to this cannabis and psychedelics festival called Cannadelic, that I'll get back to in a second because it's pretty fun. But I'd gone there thinking like, okay, I'm going to this festival. There's going to be an opportunity for me to like latch on with a company and tell my story about how this saved me from addiction and be able to help people. But then I got there and I'm like, oh wait, there isn't really opportunity for that yet. Like the industry is still figuring itself out big time.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, well, I just need to continue writing and continue working on myself. And so I was doing this job. I was a work from home sales job that I'd gotten while I was up in Connecticut and allowed me to move down.
Oh, okay.
All of 2022, all of 2023. And by the time the end of 2023 came out, I was in this position where I'm like, okay, I don't love the work from home culture. I feel so secluded from people. I don't
Mm-hmm.
feel like this is really a purpose driven uh, style of work to spend my everyday doing. What can I do that I can be out interacting with more people, feeling like I'm making an impact for people? And so I found a job as a director of sales for a company that was working with personal injury attorneys to help them get better compensation for plaintiffs in personal injury cases.
Okay.
But after doing that for a month and a half, I realized that it was really just a money grab for the attorney
Mm.
and was like, what am I doing? And so on February 11th uh, of 2024, I went out and I played pickleball with one of my friends, and he could tell that my mind just like was not on the game. And
Yeah.
I wrapped up playing with him early. We went and got dinner, and we just like talked about life and kind of where I was. And then I left and I went for a bike ride home. But I was getting an intuitive message to not go home and to stay out longer, and so I did. And I biked down to the end of the pier here in St. Petersburg, which juts out into Tampa Bay, and it's absolutely
Oh,
gorgeous.
okay.
Overlooking the city, it's like such a magnificent piece of the culture here in St. Pete. But on a Thursday night at about 10 p.m., it was completely empty, and I was like, "Oh my god, the pier is completely empty." Uh, so I biked all the way to the end of it, and with nobody there, I sat at the end of the pier and I just broke down crying. Hi, Purry boy. um, and I just broke down crying at the end of the pier, and then had this moment where I just surrendered to God. I connected with God for what was really the first time in my life. When I had that connection at EDC that I spoke about earlier, I didn't really recognize where the message was coming from or what I was exactly
Oh,
experiencing.
okay.
But when I was at the pier, I was looking up at the sky, just like looking at the stars, and had this connection where I was told, dude, I've been giving you intuition your whole life. Are you ready to actually listen? And I was like, I'm ready to listen. Just tell me what to do. And he's like, okay, you know what to do. So I quit my job 2 days later. And I had a recognition in that moment on the pier that I had poured a lot of time and effort into making myself physically elite and could make an immediate impact for others in that regard. So I got my personal training certification. I started taking classes to help coach people on how to use psychedelics to make positive changes in their own life. And I founded my company called Get Psyched Fitness, which is a combination of personal training and mental health services for people looking for total mind body connection. And so,
Nice.
since making that choice a year ago, there have just been a million little things that have shown up to help me continue on the right path. And one of those came about 3 months after I had that conversation with God on the pier when I went to this entrepreneurial group here in St. Pete for the first time. And again, I got an intuitive hit to go to that meeting. And on my first meeting that I attended, I met the founder of the Cannadelic Festival, who,
Oh.
yep, who let me know that he really liked my story. He liked the way that I presented myself and the way that I spoke. And they give me a speaking opportunity at last year's Cannadelic Festival if I was able to get my book completed by then. Uh,
Wow.
yeah, so I got my book completed by the start of July. Cannadelic was in the middle of July, and
Oh, wow.
yeah, just in the nick of time.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was able to get that done, had the opportunity to speak, there and really bring it, not quite full circle yet, but
Mhm.
to just really feel like I'd done what I knew that I needed to do after I left Canadelic, was just continue to work on myself and uh, tell my story and how psychedelics made the impact for me. And so it's just been a really beautiful ride where, I continue to um, I continue to see the positive influence of the experience that I had play out for myself and others, and all the while have continued to push myself physically. Just last month, so this is gonna sound kind of crazy, but last month, February, February 1st, I competed in a strongman competition. Uh,
Oh, nice.
yeah, which I don't know if you're familiar, but it's where you're, picking up giant stones and walking
Yeah, yeah.
like that. Yeah, so I did that on February 1st. On February 9th, I ran a marathon.
Oh my.
Yep. February 15th, I did this competition called DECA Fit, which is
Okay.
a high intensity interval training competition.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
the weekend after that, I helped two of my friends complete a 224-mile bike ride plus 52-mile run.
Oh
Uh,
my goodness.
yeah, next year for me. And then the week after, I ran a 5K PR. So it was a pretty insane month. And I just am continuing to find different ways to challenge myself and have fun, uh, doing what I say that I'm doing, which is releasing any limiting beliefs that I may have and just going for things that excite me and light me up and bring me joy in life. And so I just hope to bring that to other people. And I feel like I am providing people that type of inspiration to just follow what they want to do and just show up and see what happens.
Yeah. That is so awesome. I love all that. Um, so I always like to ask a random question at the end. Um, about what piece of wisdom would you give somebody who is being forced to give up something that they had always thought was what they were going to do? So remember how you were kind of forced to give up baseball. What would be your piece of wisdom to somebody?
My piece of wisdom would be that change is okay.
Mhm.
Uh, we fight change like crazy if we're not secure in ourselves and we're not confident that there's a better life ahead. But there is always positives to be gained if you look for it, right? The name of my book is Your Mindset is Your Reality, and that's for a reason. Is that when I went through my experience, I went from depressed, anxious, locked into, the patterns that trauma had built for me over the years. And I came out of that happy and, embracing life and just ready for whatever life was going to come next. And the only thing that changed was how I thought about the things that happened to me earlier in life.
Mhm.
So if you're forced to make a change, if you feel like there's something that is out of your control, whether that's getting fired from a job or, being injured and not able to play your sport or whatever it is, find the positives because there are numerous in any situation. And if you can focus on the positives rather than focusing on the negatives, your life's going to be a hell of a lot better.
Beautifully said. So I know you've mentioned your book a couple of times, but tell us a little bit more about, I suppose, and where people can pick it up.
Yeah. So again, the name is Your Mindset is Your Reality, a firsthand account of the positive effects of psilocybin on mental health and addiction. It is, by all accounts from people who read it, something that really puts myself out there. It is uh, a really vulnerable story about where I was and how I decided to embrace change. And I hope that that shows through whether you know me or learn to know me through the book. Is just uh, how incredible the experience was and how others who may be in a similar position can learn from what I learned. It's available on Amazon. It's available on Kindle. And I just finished recording the audiobook. I just need to edit it and
Woo!
publish it, so it should be available soon.
Awesome. I love audiobooks.
Yeah, it's my favorite way of consuming too, and it's just been a process getting it completed, but it'll be
Yes.
done soon.
Yeah, I love it because then you can do it while you're bike riding or exercising. My husband's always like, how could you listen to podcasts or listen to books while you're exercising? Because he's like, it's all about the music. And I'm like, I don't know. I enjoy it. It gets me like really out of my head because I'm thinking about this. My body's doing something, like I'm not doing anything that's taking
Yeah,
effort. I love it, but everyone is different.
most definitely. I'm the same exact way, Randy. Give me a good audiobook or podcast, and I'll run for hours.
Yeah, exactly. So where do people follow you?
I'm most active on Instagram. My Instagram handle is Johnny B, JohnNniebe. I'm also on X, Twitter at psilocybin fit, PSILOCYBINFIT, but much more active on Instagram, and be happy to connect with anybody who's interested in learning more.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing with us.
Thank you so much, Randy. Love talking with you.
As always, thank you so much for the amazing guests that we have on the show. Be sure to check out their links down in the description below. If you want to support the channel, go ahead and check out our merch store. We've got some very cool things on there. That's my favorite. Sorry, I'm busy ending the stigma. But there's some other very cool designs. 10% of the proceeds always goes back to the Canadian Mental Health Association. Be sure to follow us on Facebook at RB Media because we have some great new shows coming up and you never want to miss any of those episodes. And remember, the only way to end the stigma of mental health is to speak openly and honestly. Bye!